Hi. Hello, everyone. No, Tiwa, I don't even want to. I don't even know what to say. Like the entire thing just went off. I've lost the first half of this conversation is because my internet connection went out and it just died. So I wasn't able to save the first part of this conversation, which is heartbreaking for me. Um, Whosa. I don't even want to. It is what it is. Yes. So welcome back, everyone. One day soon, I will be able to do this in a way that I'll move from Instagram lives to having a proper show. Everybody say amen for me so that these kinds of issues don't happen again because, yeah, my internet connection just went out and I've lost the first half and all the amazing things that Dr. Ayonrinde shared with us, unfortunately, gone. So we'll take it up from where we left off. Dr. Ayonrinde is back now. I'm just going to try and add him. Let me add Dr. Ayonrinde. I spent the last 5 minutes trying to find another internet. MTN, shame on you. I have to say that because MTN just completely fell my hand. Dr. Ayonrinde, that was not you. That was MTN here. The thing just dropped completely, just decided it wasn't going to work. So I had to go look for another internet, another internet router. Anyway. And unfortunately, I don't know if you heard me say, but because of the way it went out, I wasn't able to save the first part of our conversation. Unfortunately, I can't save it. But those who were here heard all the amazing things that you shared. And we'll pick it up from where we left off, which is where we were talking about the relationship or the connection between learning disorders or autism spectrum disorders, I think that's what you called it, and mental health challenges. So if a child is has learning disorders, ADHD or dyslexia, just learns differently from, what the schools are used to, how does this impact on the child's mental well-being? Or if a child has autism spectrum disorder, what's the connection there also, or is there a connection there?
Yep.
And please, sorry, before you answer that, guys, I knew there were a lot of questions already in the question box. All those have all gone away. So if you have questions, please put them in the question box again, and I'll try to get Dr. Ayonrinde to answer your questions a little bit later. Sorry, back to you.
Thanks, Kami. You're the consummate professional, barely blinking, even when you lost power. And I think the word connection, I'm going to avoid using it just because we lost it. Yeah, but again, so we were speaking earlier about autism spectrum disorders, and then we've got things like ADHD. And again, there's a lot more ADHD than we think. And a salute to some of our cultures: ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And ADHD comes in pretty much 3 types. So you've got the hyperactivity, and that's the one most people see. So the person's, if you're really into Winnie the Pooh, it's like Tigger, bounce, 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 moving, can't keep still, distracted, and so on.
Yeah.
That can be really difficult. So that's the hyperactivity. Then you have the inattention. Inattention, you actually don't see as much because the child is there daydreaming. So
Right.
it's, Deji, I asked you to do this. Deji, yes. What I asked you to do? Oh, I don't remember. And sometimes we have really bright children who haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, who are then struggling. So if I had ADHD and I sat at the back of the class, everyone in front of me is going to be distraction. Every scratch of the head, pen, pencil, and so on may be distracting me. Now, one of the changes, apart from the other ones with medication and stimulants and so on, may be that I sit in front of the class. So rather than see 28 heads, I'm seeing 2. So I'm better focused. If I had ADHD and I sat at the back of the class by the window, I'm in a mess, because every pigeon that flies by, every person that goes by, plus the classroom, I'm just in that space. We should give a lot more credit to our cultures as well, because some of our cultures actually recognize these disorders. In Yoruba, there's Ara Obale Olori Arun. And that's pretty much recognizing hyperactivity, poor attention, poor concentration. And as I said earlier, anything that affects our attention and concentration will invariably influence our memory. So the child may be really bright with ADHD and struggle. Now, if we support the child into areas of their strength, and I think the demographic you have are probably the demographic that will know music groups, for instance, like Black Eyed Peas. I'll only make reference to people who've spoken of theirs. will.i.am has ADHD. And he's incorporated into his music, the way he dances, spins in the chair. So he harnesses the ADHD into being his best self. Now, I could have an autism spectrum disorder, and as my holiday job, I could be an amazing person in the kitchen, slicing whatever or laying out the dish, just the most beautiful way. But I may not be great at customer service, smiling at people and receiving them. So my strengths will be better suited to that rather than the interpersonal bit. So it really is understanding, early diagnosis where possible, and supporting people into their strengths and help them build confidence where they may be weaker.
Okay. So I think, it's important for us to kind of take in what you've just said, which is the fact that, we all have, even if it's not a ADHD or it's not Asperger's or it's not some other type of recognized learning disorder, we all have different strengths and different things that we can play to. And as parents, part of our job, I think, is to figure out what your child's strengths are and help the child find an environment or find ways to play to that strength, as opposed to trying to pigeonhole the child into some predetermined either way of learning or predetermined occupation or predetermined is to figure out what's best for this particular child. And I think you said at the beginning of the conversation that no two children are the same. Even when you have siblings, they can be very different. And so there's also and again, speaking about our culture, because that's where we're talking about our cultural context, we do have that thing where children are compared a lot. You have a first child, for example, who's extremely conventionally extremely bright, extremely, top of class, top in everything, just had sailed through school. And then the second child comes along and, you're just trying to say, why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be like your brother? And I've seen that quite a bit, especially if the two children go to the same school. The first child who went to that school, was a superstar. And the next child comes along, and even the teachers are saying, you can't possibly be so-so-so's sibling because you are not as smart. Or the child, the parents are also kind of comparing both children to the detriment of the one who maybe isn't wired the way the first one is. And then let's layer that on. We come from a culture again where we favor authoritarian approach to parenting, where it's this is what I say, my word is law, you follow my law. any child who's not conforming, you beat it out of them, or you bend them into shape. Where I've said quite a bit there, but in again staying in our culture, what effects does that kind of approach have on a child's well-being?
Yeah, another good question. Now, the birth order can be quite a complex issue within our culture. And there's an expectation if you're first born, that you're inherently born with intelligence, leadership skills, diplomacy. You are it. And you're meant to then lead all the others. Now, it's then really tough. What if you've got younger siblings who the person may have different interests, who are thriving and so on? And it's not helpful comparing children. It really isn't. So why can't you be like your sister or like your brother and so on? These are places where we can start sowing seeds of low self-esteem. We're allowed to be different. And if you're really, really, really different to the others, hey, good on you. You're limited edition. You're not just cookie cutter child. And so that can be problematic. And we would encourage, statements like, look at, this one is not like the rest. This one, no. Every child is different. Our fingers are different. Even the bits of our body that are twinned are different. Our eyes aren't identical. Our nostrils aren't identical. Our ears aren't, and so on. So it's not helpful. Now, the authoritarian bit, there are things about our culture where we're sort of spread over two cultures. On the one hand, you want a conformist. And forgive me, I'm not trying to sound sexist about this, but example, for instance, in relationships, the man wants the wife to have the food on the table, piping hot, freshly cooked, and so on, and conform like an African wife. Yet when they're out, he wants her to be Western and sophisticated and da-da-da-da-da-da. And, these sort of splits, and it's really, really confusing. So crushing a child into feeling they're not worth much, crushing their self-belief and their confidence isn't helpful. Now, are there some children that are difficult? Yes. Are there some children that need a bit more assertiveness, boundaries? Yes. Are there differences between boys and girls? Yes. Some children, you don't even ask them, they're off to do their homework. Others, you've taken away the remote control, you've switched off the Wi-Fi, you've locked the door before they do the homework. Even then, they just do any bala bala, and then they say they've done it. So we're different, but if it's couched in love and caring and the best intent, but crushing isn't the way. And I'm going to avoid anything political, but is it actually an authoritarian system that has people conforming to things they don't even believe in? Are we internalizing that? And in literature, they talk things like power distance. And power distance is how much is the boss, the total organ on top. And, if the person's there that you can't, so in the workplace, what name do you call the person? Do you sort of bow and so on? Or can you call the person first name and so on? And Nigerian culture by default has power distance. The person in charge, the gap is big. Well, in some other cultures, it allows other people to be able to innovate and contribute.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to kind of look at the questions that have come in so far. But I don't know. I have a couple more questions. I'm trying to see if I should take the questions. Let me take in the questions, take some of the questions that have come in first. To everyone who's just joining, if you missed the first half, I don't know what to say, but Dr. Ayonrinde sort of has talked us through from early childhood, those factors that may impact on a child's mental and emotional well-being, the interplay between nature and nurture. We talked about that. hereditary factors versus environmental factors, how those come together to say which child will be emotionally robust and healthy and which one might struggle a little bit. Early warning signs to look at. He said, if a child, assuming the child is in a safe environment, which if your child's personality suddenly changes, if a child was outgoing and engaging before and then becomes withdrawn, or a child who used to like being touched but doesn't, or used to be more tactile but suddenly isn't, a child starts sleeping a lot when during the day, or is sleeping less, or is eating more, just changes from what was the norm for that child before, are things for us to look out for as parents and caregivers, and that we may want to begin to find interventions for. Am I right, Dr. Ayonrinde?
Correct.
We also talked about this present social media, the internet age, the digital age, all of that, how that impacts on children of this generation, because sometimes there's the feeling that this generation, they're just too fragile, they're too thin-skinned, they're not tough, they just need to toughen up. All this one that we are saying, one child has depression, one child has social anxiety disorder, we're just indulging these children. They are not different from other generations, so why can't they just get over whatever is wrong with them, or whatever is quote unquote wrong with them? And Dr. Ayonrinde spoke about the fact that this is not like for like, that this generation is facing unique challenges, unique factors that previous generations didn't have to deal with, and all of that, the prevalence of social media, the ubiquity of social media, and all of that. We've spoken about our social-cultural dynamics, the Nigerian culture being hyper-competitive, outcomes, academic achievement is a big part of how we define success. So any child who is not getting first-class grades may begin to feel, it may impact their social, their self-esteem. Parents placing undue pressure on their children to perform in a certain way, and how we measure our ROI. We spoke about ROI, return on investment. I'm paying all this money, all these school fees for you, and what I want in return is top grades. What I want in return is for you to go to Harrow, Cheltenham, Harvard, and Yale. If you can't get into any of these institutions, and if you're not studying certain things, then I consider you a failure. And he went from there to speak about how every child is different, and how we shouldn't be trying to pigeonhole our children into certain outcomes. From there, we started to talk about learning difficulties, learning differences, autism spectrum disorder, and how the connection between those and mental health challenges as well. So now we are on, we're sort of getting to where I wanted to say, where can you find help? Where can you, as a parent, if you live in Nigeria, where can you find help? Where can you find help wherever you live? But before I do that, I wanted to take questions from the audience. So I hope maybe I've summarized a little bit. It's just a summary. I don't know if I've done it justice, because Dr. Ayonrinde really went deep, but thank you, Dr. Ayonrinde. So here are some questions from the audience. There's a question from Omoyemi Akirile. Now, Instagram does this where it cuts off the question, but it says, how does picking up on things work though? Because I think this question was to your earlier point on looking at, paying attention to our children and being attuned to them, so that when we notice a change in their behavior, or that we can pick up on it. But she says girls are very good at masking or mirroring behavior. I can't see the rest of the question. So let me see. How do you pick on it before it's cut off? Girls are very good at masking or mirroring behavior. So how do you pick up on it before it gets out of hand, I think is what she's saying.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I'm going to give a personal example, which was from my growing up. And there were things I thought I'd concealed and hidden away and so on. And there was a day one of my parents sat me down and said, you know, there have been so many occasions we knew you weren't telling the truth and so on, but we just let it go because it wasn't big enough. And I was reminded that every single facial expression I had, my mannerisms, the way I would look away, or, you know, my pauses, they'd known since I was a baby. Now, those who know us really, really well can know our facial expressions, our tics, our mannerisms. When, you know, your little child comes home and say, you know, Jimmy, what's the matter? I'm fine. And you know things aren't right. I mean, the person may not say what it is, but you know. Are some people better at concealing or masking or holding emotion than others? Yes. Do we generalize it just to girls? Perhaps not, but not everyone is an open book. And I recall a time when a young person would be humming at the dining table. And I'll say, no, 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 don't hum while you're eating. And then hum, hum, hum. Please don't hum while you're eating. And then the person stopped humming. And then an hour later, the person said, actually, I still continue to hum, but this time I was doing it in my head. And I said, drat. So that's an example of a situation where we can't own everyone's thoughts. We may make observations, but can we enable this to be, the person feels safe to share it? So great question. It's tricky.
It is tricky. So again, I think it goes back to, you know, creating a safe environment, a secure environment where ultimately the child can feel that they can share, and also maybe as it's parenting. This is why it takes a village, like, you know, like this topic. The topic is because when there is maybe a multitude of caregivers, parental figures, aunts and uncles, where the parent themselves may miss something, maybe an auntie will catch it. But having that community of people around your child who love and care for your child and are able to pick up on cues, I think will help. Busola says, can you speak about ADD, ADHD, these learning differences? Is this on the rise? Are we seeing it more in this generation again, or is it something that we just was present before, but just maybe went undiagnosed, or nobody really knew what it was? Or is it on the rise?
Yeah, my position would be that actually it's just been diagnosed more. Certainly, I know that through my medical training, there wasn't much. And the majority, even now, the majority of physicians, doctors, are not trained or competent to make these diagnoses. It's just things they weren't trained in. Even amongst people who are mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, not all are experienced in these areas. So my reference point was I was working in a national center, special center in London at the Maudsley, that involved in assessing people with these complex disorders. So it can be quite, I would say, we're diagnosing more because people are more experienced at picking it up. And there are lots and lots of physicians' children with ADHD that don't even know. I saw the son of a GP now who had ADHD, but the parents, I'll give an example from music. If I have ADHD, I'm going to more naturally gravitate towards the drum because I can move and twitch, and that's going to work for me with a drum kit. I'm probably less likely to be comfortable with a harp or something really, really slow. If I have ADHD, I could be really comfortable with basketball. I would suffer playing cricket because just for the pace. So sometimes people will naturally gravitate, and in this person's case, the parents just thought, it was practicing the drum all the time, but he had ADHD right under their nose. A person with ADHD may appear clumsy, and anytime they eat, Deji, why is it only you that keeps spilling the juice? Or dropping the rice and so on. And that could be ADHD. So I think we're becoming more aware and diagnosing better. It doesn't mean the brains have suddenly started changing.
Changing, okay. All right, thank you for answering that. I'm going to take another question. This question is from Kumbi. If there's a history of mental health illness in a family, how can one prepare or be alert to it in our children to ward it off, or be equipped to, again, it's cut off, but to be equipped to nip it in the bud, I imagine I think is what he's saying.
Yeah, good question. I'll start with the premise that no one, absolutely no one, enjoys 100% mental health all the time. We all have 100% minus a factor of X. And sometimes, for instance, I may have a genetic risk for schizophrenia, and I go through life without using cocaine or high-dose cannabis, and I may just make it through. Another person with exactly the same risk ends up in a horrible relationship with domestic violence, has bullies in the workplace, ends up using drugs and alcohol, and the illness manifests. So there are many of us sitting on a volcano of illness, but because we've been in emotionally supportive, safe environments or experiences, it's not erupted. If we are aware that we've got a very high risk, then to be aware to the vulnerabilities as well. So, for instance, drug use in the person, if a child's using drugs, helping that concern that, look, Deji, the way you're using cannabis, your uncles, your aunties, your grandpa, and so on have schizophrenia, you're really at risk at developing this disorder, and so on. Sometimes we can't avoid trauma, a car crash, or some of these complex situations. But if there is genetic risk that we're aware of, for instance, of depression, we may need to learn other ways of coping. If mom had depression, and a point to make that you made much earlier is also vicarious learning by observation. If I grew up with a parent depressed and observe that parent's response to the world in a depressed way, I could normalize that because that's just the way I see it. There's something about our individual features as well that make us, so again, let's think of twins, Tola and Tolu, twins, but non-identical twins, or identical twins. Tola has a very smiley face, and Tolu's got a cold that day, and they're out in the shopping mall. And everyone says, oh, look at them, gorgeous twins, oh. And, Tola, everyone's smiling at Tola, and Tola smiles back, and Tola gets a good dose of smiles. Tolu that day has a fever, and ooh. I said, oh, goodness, he's not having, and Tola may get 80 smiles in that shopping trip, and then Tolu ends up getting 20 because he's having a bad day. And feeding off it, so Tola's going to see a world that's beautiful, full of smiling, happy people. And Tolu's going to see people who are recoiling and so on. So some of us naturally will evoke warmness and response from others. And for those of us who aren't naturally like that, we're far from broken. There's a place for every personality trait. And for instance, people who are quiet, they're quiet from their mouths, but they're seeing things. And that quiet person we know who doesn't say much, but when they talk, you better listen. And there are people who are a bit gobby who end up in broadcasting or psychiatry, Kemi and I. And okay, I'm going to shut up before I dig myself into the hole.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayonrinde. I think what I hear you say is the fact that even if, first of all, something that you said that I think is key is that we all have, I guess, to some extent, some predisposition to mental health challenges. Like nobody is 100% immune, and nobody is experiences 100% mental health, optimal mental health 100% of their lives. But I guess the degree, of course, there's some of us who have maybe genetic predisposition to maybe schizophrenia or depression. And if we're aware of that, then we can be a bit more also aware of what our potential triggers may be, and how to navigate that, things maybe to avoid. And then in parenting, being more careful, therefore, like you said, if a parent has depression, the child may normalize that as a response to environment. So as parents, again, being more aware, so we are careful about how we parent and support our children so that they can have the best shot. I think that's how I would summarize what you said. Another question here. I think you've answered this, so I'm not sure. Okay. So here's a question. What are your views on coaching and personal development for young kids and adults? Is this something that's helpful for children or for young children, or for young adults to maybe have a coach to help them navigate some of these challenges? I think that's the question.
Okay, well, I'll respond to that using the old language and the new language. So in an older generation, coaching was lesson. You've gone to school and you're still going to do lesson, and you're sitting there doing sums for hours and so on. I presume the questions around coaching in the contemporary use of the term. And there are opportunities for coaching. We're not talking of saturating someone out of their adolescence. But there may be an area where the person could improve. So I may be really, really shy, bright, but really shy. And I may be coached to feel more comfortable with it. There are things about our culture, for instance, you do not look adults or older people in the eye. And that's a big problem for international medical graduates when they go abroad, because if you look shifty. It's like, and I've coached many young doctors into, okay, if you can't look the person in the eye, just look at their ears. There's no laser beam locking in, and so on. So there is a role for coaching, but what we're not trying to do is totally change the person from who they are. But if there are areas where they could be strengthened, or their self-esteem or confidence, the brain continues to develop roughly up to the age of 25. So, they're really critical developmental years, and you don't give up on someone at the age of 17 or 18. I mean, there's still time to grow. I saw somewhere someone typed the word or phrase neuroplasticity, and the brain continues to mold and develop and so on. And then around the age of 25, the brain starts to be mature, and that's when we start having old school reunions, and it's Cam, you've not even changed since we were in school, and so on, because personalities started forming.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting questions here. Maurice Sola, your question about the connection between dyslexia and mental health problems. Maurice Sola is asking if the risk is high or negligible. I think you already answered this question, so
I could touch it really quickly. In that,
so yes,
dyslexia. So many people with dyslexia have been missed. So many people with dyslexia have been rubbished or put aside because they see letters of the alphabet and numbers the wrong way around. That's just the way their brains are wired. An example, I'll say a poster boy of dyslexia is Richard Branson, the owner of Virgin. Many people have dyslexia and can thrive if it's picked up early. And there are many people with dyslexia who struggle and are treated unintelligent and not bright because the system has failed to pick it. It's not their fault, it's not been picked.
Okay. So the connection then, of course, I think is, to your point, Maurice, the connection, of course, is if a child is struggling, that impacts on the child's self-esteem and their confidence, which obviously then impacts on their mental health. A child who's struggling at school and feels like, and is being made to feel like they're not intelligent or smart, is probably at risk of depression and experiencing mental health challenges.
In
Am I
fact,
right?
you're way more eloquent than me with this, Cami. But that's right. So here I am with dyslexia, and the teacher says, Deji, I would like you to stand up and read this passage from Macbeth. I die that day because I
Mm,
can't.
mm,
I just can't. And I get bullied, I get picked on, I'm shaking, I'm sweating, I hate school, I hate literature. But you give me that passage in an audiobook, and I'll nail it for you. And that's
mm.
why more and more schools are giving educational adjustments for people who may have dyslexia and other different ways, alternative ways of having their brains wired.
Thank you. Um, Can you please shed some light on bipolar disease?
I'll do that, and I'll make it super quick. So it's bipolar affective disorder. Bipolar is in two poles, the pole that goes up and the pole that goes down. That's why it's called bi. Same thing, bicycle, two cycle,
Mm,
bisexual, etc. Affective, it's just doctors trying to sound clever. Affect just means mood. So a two-pole mood disorder is bipolar affective disorder. Now, it's got two phases, one in which the mood is elevated. And if my mood is elevated, referred to as mania, I could be talking really quickly because I think and I've got so much energy, I'm so gifted. I'm just a millionaire. Man, I'm so rich, I could own Instagram. So that's the manic phase of illness. I can't sleep, lots of energy, ideas, whiz, 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 whiz. The other pole is depressed phase. And that depressed phase, I'm just feeling low, suicidal, and depression I described earlier. So that's why it's bipolar affective disorder. Now, think of it like driving. So with bipolar, speed limit is 50, you're driving at 100. And that's
mm,
mania. In depression, the speed limit is 50, you're driving at 5. And that makes the principles of treatment really, really easy. Because if I'm driving too fast, the treatment is brakes, and quite often medication called antipsychotic medication is used. If I'm driving too slow, it's an antidepressant to pick up the speed. But to get the balance right, we use things called mood stabilizer. And for those of you who drive modern cars, that's like cruise control. And that's where
mm.
lithium, valproates, and so on come in. So great question. If you understand bipolar, it makes sense. And we all consume bipolar. You know, Van Gogh is alleged to have had bipolar. You can see it in his artwork. You know, bright, radiant colors when he was elevated in mood. Monochromatic artwork when he was depressed and dark. And a certain musician who shaved off her hair and is going through court has spoken about her bipolar disorder.
Mm, right. Okay. Just going to take a couple more questions. I don't want to keep you on too long. And you've already stayed with us now well over an hour. The questions are still coming in. Okay. One major concern, here's a question from Talani Martin. One major concern today centers around children harming themselves or, I guess to the extreme, becoming suicidal. How do we prevent this?
Thank you. That's a solid question. It's a big concern, and some of that is on the rise in some places. When a young person feels life isn't worth living, they may consider ending their lives. Now, we're not by default trained to know how to end our lives, but we learn it. Some people learn suicidal methods online, how to take an overdose, how to cut, which blood vessels to cut, how to hang themselves, and so on. Some people learn from peers. Now, in some parts of the world, there are media codes where if someone commits suicide, the media code does not allow reporting on the method because it becomes part of a culture of copycats. Now, can you manage all that online? Not. Some people self-harm actually because they don't want to die. And there's evidence some people may cut themselves because it releases neurochemicals within their body, endorphins and other things, and actually makes them feel better in that situation. But it's distressing because as a parent, you see cuts on someone's arm and you wonder, oh my God. what's going on here. Some people may take an action to signal their distress and accidentally end their lives. So here I am taking an overdose of medication I thought would just knock me out, but it's actually a fatal overdose. So it's a big problem. Many times it's couched in so much stigma and secrecy that people feel ashamed and embarrassed. And if you can't talk about depression and it festers, we're looking for trouble. If we look at our mood like a battery charge of your cell phone, when your charge is dropping from 100%, 60%, 40%, 30%, 10%, 5%, we really hope there's someone around that can emotionally charge our phone.
Otherwise,
tough. It's a tough one. And while I'm at it, and since you got me all manic, other rule also, you think of arithmetic. Look at our relationships around us as young people and think of the arithmetic symbols. Does the person add to us? Do they multiply us? Do they square us and make us bigger? Or do they keep depleting? If your network keeps subtracting and dividing you and make you feel smaller and so on, it's not balancing well, and time to review.
So actually, as you spoke about that, it just made me again think about, because, you know, we're keep going back to the topic for today, which is it takes a village, supporting your child through mental health challenges. So when you have a young child who's, you know, has friends, or people they consider to be their friends, but you as a parent are like, this person is not a good friend to you. I don't like who you are when you're around this person. I don't like the effect that this person has on you. This person makes you, you know, I see, as a parent, you may be able to see that this friend of yours is subtracting from you, or is dividing from you. You shrink in this person's presence. You shrink under this person's influence. How, as a parent, you know, because we all know that young people are, what's the word? When you as a parent want to tell them something about a friend, for example, the more you say, this friend, I don't want you with this friend, the more the child is thinking, no, in fact, this is the person that I'm going to continue to hang out with, because mom or dad doesn't understand anything. So how, as a parent, do you help your child to see, because this thing, like say Mama says, goes into adulthood. How, as a parent, do you empower your child to be able to make the right choices about who's around them and who they should? What does a friend look like? What does a friend not look like?
Yeah, and it's a tricky one, because parenthood sometimes has the misfortune of being wrong, whatever you say, particularly when it's in adolescence. So mom says something, it's wrong. No, mom, you treat me like a child. You're patronizing me. You think I don't know who my friends could be. Auntie Felicia says exactly the same thing. Oh, thanks, Auntie. I always knew you understood me, and so on. So parents, particularly during adolescence, which can be really turbulent, can sometimes, just because it's come from the parents, seem as if they're getting it wrong. Sometimes also parents' choice of who friends are based on their own values. You know, what you and so-and-so should be friends. You know, the person's so outgoing and will be good for you. And that can be tricky. And we're all different. We have different natural chemistry within our peers. But should you be concerned about someone and the behaviors, you can flag a concern or two. But it's difficult, because if you make the children go undercover and start concealing things, it gets tricky. I remember growing up, it's an interest in self-disclosure. One of my very best friends was a very heavy cannabis user, and I wasn't. I did not use. And it got to a stage I realized, this isn't working. And we became more distant. So parents may need to use proxy measures if they're not getting through. And many Nigerian parents are smart at it, you know, Auntie Yvonne, speak to your godson, or, you know, the way he does this, but don't say it came from me, but I've just observed he's been doing this. And that may work as well, but you don't want to push the child underground.
Okay, thank you for that. So as parents, we just have to look for different ways, different methods to achieve our aim, assuming that, again, always assuming that I'm talking about parents who have the best intentions for their children. And also, I guess, sometimes learning when to just leave the child be and when to push it a little bit and when to use proxy methods, like you said. A point someone made here that I wanted to, yes. So Yejide says, how soon after noticing symptoms should you have your child tested? So if you suspect that your child may have a learning difference or learning difficulty or something, maybe on the spectrum, what is the importance of early diagnosis on outcomes?
Yeah, now I'll make it international and local. So at an international level, many young Black people are disadvantaged in their diagnosis. So what people may present is then, Deji's presenting with challenges in the classroom and he's excluded for being a troublemaker, but there may be dyslexia and bullying going on and so on. Also, it's fair to say that race can lead to sometimes, racism does occur in health systems as well. And sometimes what's seen are rather features rather than the child's disability or difficulty. Sometimes people don't have empathy. So that happens internationally. Within Nigeria, there's a great shortage of resources. I mean, there's some amazing, exceptional schools that have educational psychologists and people who are able to assess. I would say as a rule of thumb, regardless of what we think we know, if a parent is very concerned about their child, listen. Even if you disagree, listen, because there's something about parental intuition. They just feel something's wrong. That at least listen, give it the light of day. Now, it may be proven wrong, but there are many times over when parents make an observation. They're rubbished because of their eloquence or their literacy and so on. And doctors, physicians, others can be pretty arrogant, and the understanding really is for young people and others, they don't care what you know till they know that you care. And you really want to show that you care and you listen. So we can be damaging in what we do. And I'm going to quickly segue from that into also for every single one of us here and others, we have a role in decolonizing curriculum and learning. And I'll give an example what I mean. There are, for instance, in psychiatry, in the books and in the diagnostic Bible called the DSM-5, there's a diagnosis that's alleged to have occurred from Nigeria called brain fag syndrome. Brain fag is in F-A-G.
Brain fag.
F-A-G as in fatigue. Yeah, syndrome. Okay. And this has been taught in the curricula in universities, postgraduate colleges all over the world. It's a mental disorder associated with studying amongst Nigerians and West Africans. I mean, it's nonsense. It's colonial, it's racist. Right. There was a young doctor who came to Nigeria and saw people said their brains were tired. But it's not a unique Nigerian phenomenon. So you have people in university believed to have brain fag because they're mentally exhausted. Burnout is the same thing. And for those of you who consume scripture, Ecclesiastes talks about studying and mental exhaustion and so on. So there's a lot to be done, and I would say we're in a generation now that can take on knowledge. We're informed. We don't need to conform to Western models of education. There's the Nigerian way of doing it, and do it we must.
Must. I actually love that you've said that, because sometimes, I mean, and I feel like even, part of this, we've kind of said, the issues around our culture and how, those aspects of our culture that are maybe not so good can influence or impact our outcomes for our children. But also, I love the fact that you brought up that there are good things about our culture that we need to own, and actually, instead of subscribing wholesale to a Western method or to what external learning or teaching. We need to be trying to figure out what works for us, what works for our environment, and pushing more of that. Yeah. So I love the fact that there's so many questions coming in, and I feel I don't want to hold Doctor, but I don't want people to feel like I ignored their questions. So
let's roll.
I'm going to close this.
Let's roll.
Yes. Okay. Yep. So let's roll. Okay. All right. Thank you. You've given me carte blanche. Let's roll. Winifred says, please discuss the ACEs. This is clearly some terminology that we need you to break down because we don't know what this is, but please discuss it.
Okay, so ACEs, ACES, stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So these are difficult things that happen in the critical formative years of every child that can have long-term enduring effects and actually mold us. So if you think of every child like plasticine, we're being molded. You know, the grandma being carried on the back, mama's back, you know, the things around us. So examples of ACEs would be, for instance, abuse. And by abuse, we're referring to physical abuse or sexual abuse. This happening in early developmental years, it's a problem. Now, sexual abuse and abuse, and I'll start with sexual, shatters trust. In those innocent years of childhood, when you look up to adults to help you make sense of the world around you, you're absolutely vulnerable and trusting to them. To have trust shattered at that stage so young in life, it is awful. So think of it as a row of vases, beautiful vases, porcelain, and one of them knocks off the shelf and smashes. The young person spending many more years of their life trying to glue that vase together, trying their very best, living with the effects of trauma and sexual abuse. And it's a big deal. Gender-based violence and things like that. So that's an example of an ACE. Growing up around a parent who has a mental illness. So if I had schizophrenia and I kept on telling the children, shh, they're coming to get us, hide, hide, hide. And if there was no one there, I'm internalizing this, and that's normal for me, but it's not the situation of that particular situation. Neglect, and that could be with nutrition, food, just abandoning or isolating the child, and so on.
Or
emotional neglect. And sometimes, you know, hugs are, apart from COVID, they're free. And things happen to your body. You know, the good chemicals, oxytocin, serotonin, you know, dopamine, there's something goes on even just with a hug. And I remember working with a young man who was a big-time gangster in London, England. And I do some music stuff with him. And this guy was freestyle rapping. And I said, okay, just slow down the chorus. This big-style gangster, his chorus was, mama, 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 why didn't you give me a hug? All I wanted from you, mama, was to give me a hug. Now, he's not going to tell a doctor, I wish my mommy hugged me, but he missed it. So you've got the neglect, substance misuse growing up around drugs, and the effect it may have, alcohol, other substances on the child, bereavement and loss. And for me personally, every Mother's Day, every Father's Day, for me primarily is a day to remember the children of a friend or someone I know who don't have a father or mother. It's a day especially to think there's a child out there aching for the absence of a dad or a mom in their lives. And we owe it, if we have the privilege of still being alive, to show them they are still loved, not only on those days, but important days as well. So those are examples of ACEs, and some people grow up with a ton of those before the age of 5. You know, they've been sexually, or while they're really young, sexually abused, domestic violence, a parent in jail or left the home. I do not like the term single parents. I prefer to call a mother who's parenting on her own an independent parent. I just don't like, single is as if the person isn't complete. Yeah.
Well, there's something I like to say, which is that I'm a single parent, so I say one is a whole number, and it's something that I say to myself, and I say to people as well. That so it's don't internalize this idea that you're somehow less because you're alone. One is a whole number, and you're okay.
I
So.
learned that from you. I'm going to use that as well.
So thank you for sort of talking us through what the ACEs are. And thanks for the question, Winifred. There's a question from Scandal T. Again, it's a question that's been cut off. Can a parent snoop in their child's Snapchat? I guess Snapchat is, any social media, if they have the opportunity, maybe to find out what's going on with the child. Should a parent be snooping if they're trying to figure out what's going on with their child? Is it okay? When is it okay to snoop on your child?
There's an ethics about that. So the only Snoop I know is Snoop Dogg. But on a serious note, ethically, one shouldn't. Do parents check out? And again, depends on the age of the child. If the person's a minor and on social media, underage, it makes sense. There are young girls doing sexual things for money, exposing themselves. There are people who are vulnerable to pedophilia and so on out there. So if it's the person's a minor, then actually it's less of snooping, it's being responsible parenting to be informed about what's going on. If the person's child, 19, 20, technically an adult, okay, so you find out that your daughter is having sex with 4 different guys. What are you going to do about it? And so on. Or your son is father to your next door neighbor's child. What are you going to do about it?
You're going to do about it.
Yeah.
That one is another kind of worms entirely, So it's especially as parents, I think, learning to let go when they get to a certain age. There's an age where you kind of like you said, if you find out that your 19, 20, 21-year-old daughter is doing things you may not like or you may not approve of, where do you draw the line and say this person has to live their life? What are you going to do about it? If you find out, what are you going to do about it? You can't stop them. So what are you going to do about it?
And quick segue to that, and I'll keep this brief, is also the point of how do we help young people become responsible for their own actions? And a self-example, started driving. But I can drive. Okay, please let me drive. Okay, here are the car keys. Make sure you check everything. Checked. But Dad, there's no gas in the car. Yeah, then buy gas. But Dad, I don't have money to buy gas. Then work.
Not ready to drive.
Yeah. So sometimes, the boundaries, we want to support the children enough to be independent as well, not do everything for them so they're not unable to cope.
Right. So you've said a couple of things. You talked about independent parents, which I think by so many people taking notes, yes, it's no longer single parent, it's now independent parent. We prefer that term. But also what you've just said now, which is supporting your children to become independent on their own. That I think, as a goal, as a parent, one of our primary goals is to raise children who can make the right decisions for themselves, as opposed to raising children who always rely on us to make decisions for them. I think we just have a couple more questions. Let me see. Okay. Suggestions, please, on how to help a young adult child schooling abroad who is experiencing clinical depression.
That is a big one. It's a common one. And there are lots of international students that aren't in great mental health. It can be really, really lonely, isolated, being abroad. I speak, for instance, from universities. We're doing a lot more in many universities actually to support international students as they settle in. For many, we know the rates of suicide and depression are quite high, and it can be really distressing. The child may not want to let the parents know because they know the dad sold their house in Lekki to send them to Canada or to the UK, US, and so on. And I would say, as parents, stay connected. If you begin to feel a vibe, okay, some adjustment time, yes, it's not easy living in -30 in Canada. But as time goes on, if the person's still struggling, start to build that village around the person. And I'd say I was moved close to tears when an anonymous young man who was severely depressed had failed 2 years non-stop, and the parents didn't know he'd failed, and was being excluded. And somehow we assembled an African village around this young person. Food was covered, loving support was covered, mentoring, caring, and so on. And sureties given to the university that this person will be supported through, got therapy and the rest. This person's graduated with flying colors. Now, from being so scared and ashamed to even mention it, the person turned it around. And that was the best of an African village. There's something about getting older that I'm that bit of our culture that ensures no one walks alone. We shouldn't relinquish for being Western in our ways.
Yeah.
So if your child's abroad, if they're in a city, is there an uncle, someone or auntie, someone, a family they can pop into, someone that can be there for them? If not, find one. There'll be a Nigerian, hopefully sensible, nearby, or if not, someone who understands the culture that can be there for them.
It really does take a village.
It sure does.
It sure does. So then I'm going to take the last question from the audience and then close out. This question is from Kumbi. Do you encourage therapy in addition to meds for mental health disorders? I think the UK tends to err on the side of meds, which he says, let me see if I can get which we all know can have side effects.
Right, so for many mental health disorders, it's actually a combination. So if I have mild depression, really mild depression, actually the guidance would not be to use an antidepressant. It would be exercise, behavioral activation, natural light, and a whole range of other things, talk therapies. If it's moderate to severe, sometimes it will require medication. Is there any medication that is totally side effect free? No. Even paracetamol. So if I labeled a bottle of water for you with side effects, the products of this container may cause drowning. It's used in toilets and lavatories and may I mean, that's water. But on a serious note, there's a role in some mental disorders like the psychosis and so on for medication, which may help balance chemicals in the brain. But there's a role also for psychological therapy. And the way I explain it is antidepressant medications like a float in the swimming pool. So it'll may stop you from drowning. It will never teach you how to swim. And that's where the therapy does. The therapy, the loving engagement of Auntie Kemi, the caring, therapy, and the rest. That is the swimming lesson bit. But if the antidepressant's meant to, and another example, if I'm on an antidepressant, a bucket load of an antidepressant, and I've got racist neighbors who keep cursing me and doing bad things, or I'm going through domestic violence or an awful relationship, the pills won't do. So pills don't give you skills. And it's that balance. But medication on its own, it's easy. I would argue there's something about us as humans that are socialized, that wants to interact with another human being. AI will sort out medication soon. You stand on the scales, do your blood test. Okay, take this dose of medication. And then the machine will just give you. But that empathy, caring, compassion, kindness, you need your village members, or they won't give you
The
that
village
one.
the
You need
village
your
people that we so often run away from. Sometimes, those very village people are the ones that we need. I love the analogy that you gave, that the meds will help you float, but they won't teach you how to swim.
Mm-hmm.
I know pills don't give you skills, so it is a combined approach, I guess, and it's a tailored approach as well. And again, since we're talking about supporting our young people as parents and as caregivers, it's looking for that combination that works for your child. And I also imagine that, you may start with some combination and you adjust as you need to go along. So a lot of it is paying attention and also being, responding to what what the condition requires. But ultimately is being an advocate for that child. If the child can't advocate for himself or for herself, as parents, we have to be that advocate. Find, like, which I think is what Yejide did so well with Tiwa. For those who watched that episode 3 weeks ago, was really being an advocate for Tiwa, and parenting her until Tiwa could start to advocate for herself, which Tiwa is doing now. Thank you so much, Dr. Ayonrinde, because part of that village is healthcare experts like yourself finding the right doctor, finding the right healthcare provider, finding the right mental health advocate. And so the work that you do is so important as a village, as a parent, as aunties, as uncles. If we don't have people like you supporting and speaking out and telling us the resources that we can, where the resources are and how to find those resources, then we won't get very far. So thank you so much for the work that you do. I wanted to ask a final question, which is, it's a bit of a couple of questions. One, if you're in Nigeria, if you're in, I know there are people watching here from Nigeria, there are people watching from the UK, from the US, and from Canada. Where can they find help or resources if they need it? Where's the first place they should go?
Yeah, so we'll start with Nigeria. If you're in Nigeria, and depending on what sort of center you're in or what city, there are some excellent mental health professionals in private practice and in some of the government hospitals. And I would say check people out. Nigeria's big, it's small as well. Check out the person's reputation. Think of the person and whether they're the best fit for your child. So the person could have amazing reviews, but they may not be the sort of person that your child would feel comfortable with, and so on. So I would say check that out. Some of them can be found online. Some are going to be through word of mouth. You've got big centers, Yaba, Luth, Ikeja, Abuja, and all over the country. So that's what I would suggest for the Nigeria bit. In some other parts of the world, the service is already structured around the area you live in. So in the UK, your postcode defines what services will be available to you, unless you've got the resources to go private. In Canada, it's a bit of a mixed pot and so on. But I would say wherever you're seeking help, go into it being informed. Gone are the days where the doctor knew so much. And if a doctor's not willing to listen to you and is trying to sort of show off that they have superior knowledge, and if they're tone deaf to your distress, or if you notice that your child isn't comfortable with them, think of what your options may be. And sometimes actually, it's not only the health professionals. There may be other services within the school, mentorship. There are so many young people receiving mental health interventions that parents aren't aware of because through confidentiality, they just request not to. But I would say as parents, knowing your child, try and vet what's out there as well.
Okay. And finally, people are asking, how can we get in touch with Dr. Ayonrinde after this? He's on Instagram. It's at brain.drum, but he's not very active on Instagram. So outside of Instagram, Dr. Ayonrinde, how can people contact you? Can people contact you?
This is, I think I'm probably enjoying the length of time. Hopefully I've packed in some Instagram hours. So I'm now in the world of IG, and it's not just immunoglobulin in medicine. I would say if it's something really confident, if it's sort of general questions, maybe they should go through your program and we can look to develop some responses. If it's really, really private stuff, perhaps it can be flagged that a person may want a contact. I can't guarantee or promise. I don't want to sort of, the Niger thing, you know, over-promise, under-deliver. But if it's simple things like, actually, this is signposting, or, nope, I think there may be other ways of looking at this, then there may be opportunities to assist. So perhaps they should go through you first. My Instagram is, now today I launch them, so I can't.
So sending Dr. Ayonrinde a DM. Follow him on Instagram, please do. Maybe we can get him. I'll still try and work on him to get him a bit more active on Instagram, because I think people need to hear more from him. But if you've got questions, please contact me, and I will try to facilitate some sort of contact depending on what the issue is, or maybe collate the questions. If they're general questions, like Dr. Ayonrinde says, I may collate and put them before him and get answers and post those on my page. If you're not following me, follow me at Kemi Oguleye, and reach out to me on my DM, and I'll try to see what I can do. And Dr. Ayonrinde, I think what is clear is that you're going to come back on Chrystallis Conversations, because this discussion is not done. So I'm going to have to crave your indulgence and ask that we're going to schedule a part 2, especially since the first part of this conversation is lost to the internet graveyard. We're going to have to come back and do this again another day. But thank you so much for your time. I've taken up over 2 hours of your time today. Thank you to everyone who's joined. I hope you guys found this useful. Like I said, if you're not following me, follow me. If you've got questions, send me a DM, and I'll try to see how I can get the answers. Say Mama is insisting we must have part 3 and 4. So, Dr. Ayonrinde, I think you're going to be a recurring guest on Chrystallis Conversations. Thank you again to everyone who joined today. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. And I hope you guys all have an amazing week. Thank you to everyone. And yeah, God bless.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. And onisuru ló ń fún wàrà kìnìún.
What?
Onisuru ló ń fún wàrà kìnìún. It takes utmost patience and perseverance to milk a lioness. So some things you just don't rush.
Right.
If you dive in, it's going to chop you, kill you. Yeah.
Yes,
but thanks for the opportunity, and let's keep our country special. Nigeria know they last.
Nigeria know they carry last too, and it takes a village. Everyone, wherever you are, please try to be that villager for a young person around you. Try to figure out how to be a support system or be part of their support system. Thanks to everyone again. And that's it. On that note, good night. Thank you, Dr. Ayonrinde. You are awesome indeed. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.